TIFU by accidentally sending a personal message to my entire family group chat. I should probably start by saying that this is a story of how I learned the hard way that sending a personal message meant for one person to a whole group of people can lead to some very awkward situations. It all began on a typical Sunday afternoon. My family has this huge group chat that we use to share updates, memes, and all the usual family stuff. It's mostly harmless, with the occasional political debate and the endless flow of pictures of my niece's dog, but otherwise, it's a pretty chill space. So, that day, I was chatting with my cousin Jamie. I have always had a bit of a crush on him, and for reasons I still can't entirely explain, I felt compelled to tell him how I felt. Now, I'd never outright said anything to him before. It wasn't exactly something I could be open about, given that he's my cousin, and it could definitely complicate family gatherings. But for some reason, I decided to take the plunge that afternoon. I had spent the last couple of days texting him more than usual. We were talking about random things, catching up about life, etc., but then I found myself staring at my phone, overthinking everything. I was really nervous about what I was about to do, but also kind of excited. I told myself that maybe this was my chance to finally confess, and if he didn't feel the same, I could just move on. No harm, no foul. After several minutes of typing and deleting, I finally came up with a perfect message. It was casual, but sincere. Something along the lines of, "Hey, Jamie, I've been meaning to tell you something. I've had feelings for you for a while now, and I really like you more than just family, you know?" It was probably cringier than I cared to admit, but I was going for honesty over anything else. I hesitated for a second, took a deep breath, and then clicked send. But here's where things got very interesting. You see, like most people in 2025, I had dozens of different chats going on at once. I was trying to multitask, responding to a few other things, and in my anxious state, I must have misclicked. I had two open conversations at the time, one with Jamie and one with the family group chat, which included my parents, aunt, uncle, siblings, and a few cousins. I had meant to send that message directly to Jamie in our private chat. But due to my shaky finger, I sent it to the whole family group chat instead. At first, I didn't realize what had happened. I had just hit send and was anxiously waiting for a response from Jamie, completely oblivious to the chaos I had unleashed in the other chat. It took maybe a minute before I started hearing the pings. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but when the pings kept coming, I checked the chat and immediately froze. The message was right there, sitting in the middle of a conversation that was otherwise about dinner plans for the upcoming weekend. My heart dropped into my stomach as I read the words, "I've had feelings for you for a while now, and I really like you more than just family, you know?" My palms went clammy, and I could feel my face turning redder than I thought was possible. Now, I'll admit that I panicked. Big time. My mind immediately went into overdrive, trying to come up with an excuse. I quickly started typing, "Wait, sorry, that wasn't meant for this group." But the damage had already been done. The responses started flooding in. My mom was the first to respond. Her message popped up with a "what?" followed by a series of question marks. My dad, not one to let any awkward situation slide, quickly added, "Who the hell is this message for? And why are you telling us this?" It was like a family group chat version of the Spanish Inquisition, and I was stuck in the middle of it. My aunt, ever the curious one, replied almost immediately with, Who are you talking about? This isn't funny." Her tone made it clear that she wasn't sure whether I was joking or not, and the uncomfortable energy from her message made my stomach turn even more. My siblings, two older brothers and my younger sister, were just as confused. My older brother texted, "What the hell? Is this for Jamie? Are you serious right now?" I could tell he was trying to make sense of it, but honestly, I wasn't sure how to respond. At that moment, the only thing I could think was that I needed to get out of this situation. Fast. Jamie, bless his heart, was the next one to chime in. He replied to the group, I think this was meant for me, but wow, that's, really unexpected." I could tell he was just as embarrassed as I was. The next few minutes were an emotional roller coaster. My mom started texting me privately, asking if this was some kind of joke or if I was being serious. I was too embarrassed to admit that yes, I was serious. She said, "Sweetheart, This isn't the place for this. You need to talk to Jamie privately about this, not the whole family. But at that point, it was too late. My entire family was now aware of my feelings for my cousin, and there was no taking it back. To make matters worse, my younger sister decided to take things into her own hands and responded in the group chat with, "Well, this is awkward. But honestly, I think you should just talk to him about it directly." My brother chimed in with, "Yeah, dude, you've got to be kidding. That's some next-level embarrassing stuff." My aunt wasn't done either. She texted me in the group chat with, "You've got to be more careful about what you send, sweetie. This is a lot to process, and we're all worried about you." That stung a little, to be honest. It felt like a judgment from everyone who had ever known me as just their sweet, innocent little cousin. I didn't want to be that person, the one who sent cringeworthy confessions to the entire family by accident. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of texts and awkward conversations. Jamie and I spoke privately afterward, and he assured me that he wasn't weirded out by the message itself, but the fact that it went to the entire family was a bit much. To be fair, I couldn't blame him. It was a total mess. Now, weeks later, the awkwardness still lingers. Every time we have a family gathering, someone brings up that one time I accidentally sent the message. I can't go anywhere without getting teased about it. My mom, bless her, still tries to be supportive, but she always adds, "Just don't send your heart to the wrong chat next time." I guess that's my new family motto now.
So, yeah.
I learned a lesson that day about not only double-checking my messages before I hit send, but also about keeping certain feelings to myself unless I'm absolutely sure it's the right moment. And maybe, just maybe, not involving the entire family in my romantic misadventures ever again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious. When do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by pretending to be a famous author and getting into a massive legal mess. So this happened a few years ago, and I still can't believe how stupid I was. It all started when I was in my late 20s and really into writing. I've always been the kind of person who loves to write, even though I was never really good at it. But I had a dream, one of those delusional, I'm going to be a best-selling author one day kind of dreams. The problem was that I had zero connections in the literary world, no formal training in writing, and to top it off, I couldn't finish a story to save my life. But like most people who are full of misplaced confidence, I thought I could just skip all the hard work and shortcuts. Why go through the lengthy process of building a portfolio when I could just leapfrog straight to fame, right? That's where my brilliant idea came in. It all began one late night when I was browsing through Reddit, looking for advice on how to break into writing. I came across a thread where people were talking about self-publishing, and some users were discussing how they managed to self-publish books that actually sold decently. As I scrolled through the comments, my eyes landed on a post about a relatively unknown but somewhat famous mystery writer. She was a mid-list author, well-respected in the community, but not exactly a household name. Let's call her Catherine Oakley. She'd written a series of novels in the mystery genre that were gaining traction in book clubs, but she was still fairly low-profile in the grand scheme of things. Then it hit me. What if I could just become Catherine Oakley? I didn't need to write a new book. I could just write a sequel to one of her existing books and publish it as my own. She had a fairly loyal fan base, and since the book series was a bit niche, there weren't that many people who would know the ins and outs of her work. I could pretend to be her, publish the book, and claim I'd just been busy with personal matters, which delayed the release. Plus, her books weren't exactly bestsellers in the traditional sense, so I figured if I just did a decent job with the sequel, I could sell some copies and maybe make a little money on the side. Easy, right? I spent the next week binge-reading Catherine Oakley's entire catalog, obsessing over her writing style, tone, pacing, and character development. I was thorough. I took notes, mapped out her character arcs, and even started mimicking her phrasing and word choices. The idea was simple. I would write a follow-up story that could fit into her universe. I would keep the plot generic enough that fans wouldn't immediately recognize any major deviations from her work, but still add just enough of my own flavor to make it mine. After about a month of working late into the night, I finished writing the manuscript for my sequel. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. I gave it a title that was vaguely similar to one of her previous books, but not too close to raise suspicions. I spent the next couple of weeks learning how to self-publish through Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. With some tweaking of the formatting and a cover design that I created, using some free tools online, I was ready to go. I hit publish and was instantly filled with this rush of excitement. This was it, I had done it. I was officially a published author. I started promoting the book on social media, sharing it in various reading groups and forums where fans of Catherine Oakley congregated. I even started a fake Twitter account in her name, claiming that I had been in a writing retreat for the past year and was just now getting around to releasing the book. I thought I was so clever. To my shock and awe, people actually started buying the book. Slowly at first, but then a few positive reviews started trickling in. The best part was that most of the readers didn't seem to suspect anything. They were so excited about a new release in their favorite mystery series that they didn't question whether or not it was actually from the original author. For a brief moment, I actually convinced myself that I could pull this off for the long run. But then, a few months in, things started to go horribly wrong. It began with an email. At first, it seemed like a routine inquiry, someone asking where they could purchase signed copies of my book. I figured it was just a fan, so I replied politely, offering to sign a few copies if they reached out to me directly. But then, a couple of days later, I received another email, this time from a lawyer. They claimed that Catherine Oakley's literary agent had noticed my book and was concerned about the similarities to her work. They had sent me a cease and desist letter, demanding that I take down the book and stop impersonating the author. Now here's where I really messed up. Instead of just taking down the book and admitting my mistake, I panicked. I had invested too much time into this project, and I was finally making money. So, I responded to the lawyer's letter with a counterclaim. I argued that I wasn't impersonating Catherine Oakley, that I had been inspired by her work and was just creating a fan fiction-style sequel. I even tried to make it sound legitimate by saying I had discussed the project with her via email, total lie, and that she was fine with it. The lawyer responded almost immediately, threatening me with a lawsuit for copyright infringement. They had the receipts. They provided evidence of how the writing style, character names, and plot structure were too similar to Oakley's original work. They even pointed out how I had used the same vague references to locations and events from her books. That's when I realized I was in way over my head. I had done something really dumb. I tried to salvage the situation by contacting the agent and offering to withdraw the book and issue an apology. But instead of being understanding, the agent informed me that Catherine Oakley was fully aware of the situation and had already contacted her legal team. Oakley had no intention of allowing me to profit off her work, and they made it clear that I should take down the book immediately or face serious consequences. I took down the book within hours, but the damage had already been done. The whole thing went public: my name, my fake Twitter account, the story, and the subsequent legal threats. News of my scam spread through writer communities and social media. I became a cautionary tale for wannabe authors everywhere. People were furious at my audacity, and some fans of Oakley even started leaving negative reviews on my real social media profiles. In the end, I was lucky to avoid a full-blown lawsuit, but I had to pay a hefty fine to cover the legal fees. The entire ordeal left me completely humiliated. I learned the hard way that shortcuts like that aren't just morally wrong, they can also end up ruining your life in ways you can't even predict. Nowadays, I stick to my own writing, and I've learned that success doesn't come from pretending to be someone else.
So yeah.
TIFU by pretending to be a famous author and getting into a massive legal mess. TIFU by accidentally causing a massive traffic jam, losing my job, and ending up on national TV. So this all started a few weeks ago, on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning. I was running late for work, which, let's be honest, is nothing new. I work as an entry-level analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in a city with absolutely terrible traffic. I usually leave my apartment at 8 a.m. for my 9 a.m. start time, which gives me just enough buffer to avoid being late. But, of course, that morning I woke up at 8:20 a.m. My phone had died overnight, and I didn't have an alarm. Naturally, I panicked when I opened my eyes and saw the time. I scrambled out of bed, threw on whatever clothes I could grab first from the laundry pile, and rushed to get ready. By the time I was out the door, it was already 8:40 a.m. I figured there was no way I was making it to work on time, so I decided to take a shortcut, a secret route that my buddy Dave, who's been working in the city for years, swore would get me to the office faster. He told me it was a way to bypass the worst of the morning traffic jams, and while I usually wasn't one to take his advice, I thought, why not? What's the worst that could happen? So I hopped in my car, plugged in the GPS for guidance, and set off down the unfamiliar path. It was a narrow, winding street that I had never noticed before, but I figured it must be an okay route, considering Dave's recommendation. The street was less traveled, which seemed like a good sign. However, I didn't realize that secret shortcut was a little too accurate a description of this street. It was a residential area that was practically empty of cars, except for the few that were parked along the road. The whole neighborhood felt like a ghost town, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had gone too far off track. But I figured it would loop back to a main road soon. It didn't. After a few minutes, I found myself in a narrow alley that looked like it belonged in the middle of a construction zone. There were loose gravel patches, barely any streetlights, and no way to turn around. By now, I was even more late and getting anxious. But then, I saw something up ahead, a small section of the alley that appeared to be blocked off. It looked like the road was under some kind of repair. Panic set in, but I thought, I'll just keep going. It can't be that bad, right?
Wrong.
I drove into what turned out to be a section of the alleyway that had been completely barricaded off for construction. There were no signs, no detour routes, and no warning at all. My car got stuck in the middle of the barricade. I tried to reverse, but the space was too tight, and I could barely move. I began to frantically turn the wheel, hoping to find an opening, but there was none. I realized I was stuck. At this point, the adrenaline hit. I was going to miss the meeting, and my boss was already someone who didn't have much patience for tardiness. I called the office and left a rushed message saying I was running late due to unforeseen circumstances. I wasn't entirely lying. I just didn't want to explain how I managed to get myself stuck in a construction barricade in the middle of nowhere. I called a tow service next, hoping they could get me out of there quickly. But after 20 minutes of waiting, I realized I wasn't the only one who had managed to get stuck. More cars started pulling into the alley, trying to find their way out. One by one, they all got stuck in the same spot, some even closer to the barricade, blocking off the road entirely. By now, a full-fledged traffic jam had begun to form in this tiny, isolated alley. Cars were honking, people were yelling, and I could see the frustration mounting on everyone's faces. Eventually, a police car showed up. I thought, okay, now we're saved. They'll sort this out.
But no.
Instead of clearing the road, the officers took one look at the mess and decided that they needed to block off the other side of the alley to prevent further cars from getting stuck. They set up a few cones, tried to direct the drivers to reverse, but the alley was so narrow that reversing only caused more problems. Now, instead of being a single problem, this alley had become a full-on bottleneck. By this point, the street was a total gridlock. I checked my phone, and it was already 10 a.m. I was beyond late for work. I called my boss, and when he answered, I tried to explain what had happened, but he didn't even let me finish. This is the kind of nonsense that I can't tolerate, do you understand? You need to figure your life out, he snapped before hanging up. I was officially fired before I even arrived. I sat there in my car, numb with disbelief. How did I end up in this mess? But it wasn't over. As I sat in my car, trying to collect myself, I noticed something strange. People were taking out their phones, pointing them at the scene, and recording. Some were laughing, some were shouting, but no one was offering help. Then a news van rolled up. At this point, I realized that this wasn't just a random accident. It was turning into a viral spectacle. A reporter came over and shoved a microphone in my face. "What's your side of the story, sir?" she asked, looking more than a little excited about the drama unfolding. "Were you the one who caused the traffic jam?" I was in shock. I had no idea what to say. All I could manage was a weak, "Yeah, I guess I did." And just like that, I found myself on national TV. The reporter's dramatic voiceover played while they showed a shot of my car stuck in the barricade, along with a graphic that read, "Consulting analyst causes morning traffic chaos." It felt like I was living in some kind of bad dream. It wasn't just a personal failure at this point, it was a public one. I saw myself on the screen at home later that day as I tried to process what had happened. The whole situation was a mess. Not only did I lose my job, but now I was an internet meme, with people sharing clips of my tragic journey to work and making fun of my incompetence. In the end, I did get my car out of the alley, but it wasn't until the afternoon. As for the job, well, I didn't bother applying anywhere else. I was too embarrassed. And to this day, I'm the subject of all kinds of jokes from my friends. TLDR, took a shortcut to work, ended up stuck in a construction barricade, caused a massive traffic jam, got fired, and ended up on national TV as the laughingstock of the morning. TIFU by accidentally getting myself and my best friend kicked out of a wedding by the bride herself. It all started innocently enough. My best friend, Jake, and I were invited to a wedding by a couple we both knew through a mutual friend group. The wedding was at a beautiful vineyard, and while I wasn't particularly close with the bride or groom, it seemed like a good time to drink wine, eat free food, and have a fun weekend. Jake, being the social butterfly he is, was pumped about it. We both had been to a few weddings before, but we hadn't experienced the grandeur of a fancy vineyard wedding. We arrived at the venue about an hour before the ceremony started, eager to scope out the place, enjoy the scenery, and maybe make some new friends. The vineyard was stunning, rolling hills in the background, tables draped in crisp white linens, and strings of fairy lights hanging overhead. It looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. We were immediately impressed. As we were walking around, we saw a few familiar faces from the mutual friend group and joined them. The pre-wedding mingling was in full swing, with cocktails being passed around, appetizers scattered on tables, and everyone looking sharp in their fancy outfits. I was still pretty new to this social circle, but Jake had a way of blending in effortlessly. He was already making jokes and laughing with the group, while I stood there awkwardly trying to avoid eye contact with people I didn't know very well. About 30 minutes into the mingling, Jake and I found ourselves near the bar. He was talking to some guy about the best whiskey, and I was scrolling through my phone pretending to be entertained by my Instagram feed. It was at that exact moment that the bride, Sarah, passed by with her bridal party. She was gorgeous, wearing a simple yet elegant gown that looked like it belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. She was beaming with joy as she made her way to the outdoor ceremony area. I hadn't spoken to Sarah much before, but I knew she had a reputation for being a bit particular. She was the type of person who liked everything to be perfect and had very specific ideas about how things should go. This wasn't just a rumor. It was something I'd heard directly from mutual friends who had experienced her bridezilla moments firsthand. As Sarah walked by, she caught sight of Jake, who waved enthusiastically. She smiled and waved back, and that's when it all went downhill. "You guys are here early," Sarah said, clearly a little thrown off by our presence. "Shouldn't you be getting ready for the ceremony?" Jake, not missing a beat, laughed and said, "Yeah, we were just exploring the vineyard. This place is incredible." I smiled awkwardly, not sure what else to say, but Sarah's eyes narrowed as she looked at the both of us. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was busy and probably just focused on the ceremony. But then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "Well, just so you know," she said with a forced smile, "the ceremony is a little more formal than you might expect. There's a dress code. You should really be in proper wedding attire." I glanced down at my outfit, which was a nice, casual dress shirt and slacks. I thought I looked perfectly fine, but I guess it didn't meet her standard. Jake, on the other hand, was wearing a button-up shirt, jeans, and a blazer. It was definitely on the casual side for a wedding, but it didn't seem like something that would get us thrown out. Before I could say anything, Sarah continued, "And just a heads up, I've been very specific about who's allowed in certain areas. You're free to roam around the reception area, but we've got an exclusive guest list for the ceremony." I was about to reply, but Sarah was already walking away with her bridal party, leaving me standing there with my mouth slightly agape. Jake looked at me, eyebrow raised, and asked, "Did she just kick us out of the ceremony?" I laughed nervously, thinking I had misunderstood. I don't think she meant it like that. Maybe she was just reminding us of the dress code. Jake wasn't convinced. "Dude, she flat out told us we can't be in the ceremony. I've never even met her, and she's already treating us like we're not good enough to be here." At this point, we both realized there was a chance we were walking a fine line between being casual guests and being too informal for Sarah's liking. We decided to play it safe and go grab a seat in the reception area, away from the ceremony space. Unfortunately, that's when things took another unexpected turn. As the ceremony started, we noticed a few guests trickling into the reception area. Some of them had been in the ceremony, and some were clearly not dressed to the nines like the others. A few people were wearing jeans, others in slightly too casual outfits, and I started to think maybe Sarah's rules weren't as strict as she had made them seem. Feeling slightly rebellious and annoyed by the awkward encounter, Jake and I decided to grab some drinks at the bar, figuring we'd at least have fun during the reception. The bartender was friendly, and we started chatting with him about the wedding. He mentioned that there had been some tension between the bride and a few guests, and that he wasn't surprised we'd been told to stay out of the ceremony area. Apparently, Sarah had a list of people she didn't want anywhere near the ceremony space, and we were apparently on that list. After a few more drinks, Jake and I grew bolder. It was clear we weren't going to be welcomed into the ceremony, so we decided to join the rest of the reception guests. We sauntered into the main reception hall, found a table, and settled in with our drinks. The crowd was lively, music was playing, and people were laughing and dancing. But then Sarah stormed into the room. She immediately spotted us sitting at the table and came over, her face flushed with anger. Without saying anything, she pointed directly at Jake and me and said, "You two.
Out.
Now." The entire room went silent. Everyone turned to look at us, and I felt the blood rush to my face. "Excuse me?" I stammered, trying to process what was happening. Sarah was furious. "You think it's funny to ignore my requests? You're not invited here. You need to leave.
Now."
It was at that moment that I realized we had, in fact, royally messed up. Somehow, our casual attitude and sense of rebellion had crossed a line. As much as I wanted to argue, I knew I couldn't win. I looked around the room at the stunned faces, feeling humiliated, and Jake, who was already on his feet, muttered, "Let's just go, man." We grabbed our coats and walked out, our heads down. The whole situation was so surreal, I still can't believe it happened. To this day, I'm not sure what exactly triggered Sarah's outburst, but I guess we were never going to be right for her fancy wedding. So yeah, TIFU by not reading the room, thinking it would be just another fun wedding, and getting kicked out of the reception by the bride herself. TIFU by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding because I couldn't stop laughing. So this happened a few months ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how it went so horribly wrong. It all started with an innocent enough situation, my best friend's wedding. I was one of her bridesmaids, and it was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. I had every intention of making it perfect for her, but of course, life had other plans. Let me back up a little and set the scene. My best friend, Sarah, and I have known each other since we were kids. We've been through everything together: high school drama, terrible first boyfriends, family issues, you name it. So, when she got engaged to her now husband, David, I was beyond excited. The wedding was set to take place at this beautiful, rustic barn venue out in the country. Everything about it was gorgeous: the flowers, the decor, the atmosphere. It was all straight out of a Pinterest board. Now, as the maid of honor, I had my fair share of responsibilities. I helped Sarah plan, coordinated with the vendors, and tried to keep her calm whenever things went slightly off track. Leading up to the wedding, everything seemed fine. We had the rehearsal dinner the night before, and it went without a hitch. No one got drunk, no one made a scene. Everything was smooth. It was the calm before the storm. The day of the wedding arrived, and we were all up early to get ready. The bridal suite was bustling with activity, hair and makeup, dresses flying around, and bridesmaids trying to find a way to not wrinkle our dresses. Sarah was understandably nervous, but I did my best to keep her calm. We had a little moment before the ceremony, where I told her that everything was going to be perfect, and she said she felt like she might cry. I reassured her that I was here for her, and it was going to be fine. The ceremony itself was lovely, until it wasn't. So, Sarah and David are standing up at the altar, and Sarah is giving this beautiful, heartfelt speech about love and commitment. David is trying his best not to tear up. It was honestly the kind of moment that would make anyone's heart swell, and for the most part, I was totally absorbed in it. That is, until I heard something weird. The thing is, there was this bird. A crow, I think. It kept cawing loudly from a nearby tree. I noticed it, but I figured it was just part of the countryside charm. However, as the ceremony continued, the bird started to get more and more aggressive. Every few seconds, it would let out this loud, shrill caw that sounded almost like it was mocking us. It wasn't like the gentle chirping you might expect from birds in the background. It was intense, almost like a bad omen. I tried to ignore it at first, but then it got worse. As Sarah was reading her vows, the crow cawed again, right in the middle of a particularly emotional part. And I lost it. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. It wasn't even a full-on laugh at first, just a little snicker. But that snicker turned into a giggle, which turned into full-blown laughter. I could feel the tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from how ridiculous the situation was. I mean, who laughs at a wedding? At their best friend's wedding? I looked around, hoping no one had noticed, but of course, everyone had. Sarah paused in the middle of her vows, giving me the most bewildered look. The bride's best friend, the maid of honor, was literally cracking up at her wedding. To make matters worse, I wasn't able to stop. It was like one of those uncontrollable laughing fits where you know you should stop, but the more you try, the worse it gets. The crow kept cawing in the background like it was adding fuel to the fire. Every time it did, I would laugh harder. And then David, bless his heart, started chuckling too. I'm not sure if it was out of confusion, nerves, or because he could see how hard I was trying to hold it together, but there he was, laughing with me. The entire church was now looking at us, Sarah, the bride, standing at the altar, trying to figure out if we were having some kind of mental breakdown, and the two of us cracking up uncontrollably. At this point, I had tears in my eyes, not from the ceremony, but from the sheer absurdity of what was happening. I saw the look on Sarah's face shift from confusion to anger, and then to disappointment. She looked at me like I was ruining the most important moment of her life, and in a way, I was. But no matter how hard I tried to stop, I couldn't. The situation just felt so wrong, and I couldn't get a grip on myself. The officiant, who, by the way, was not prepared for this kind of chaos, tried to move things along. He gave us a few awkward seconds of silence, but the damage had been done. Sarah's vows were completely overshadowed by me losing it. And then, as if it wasn't enough, the crow cawed again, and I completely lost it. I fell to my knees laughing, clutching the side of the altar for dear life as I tried to breathe through my hysterics. Eventually, I realized what I had done. I wiped the tears from my eyes and tried to compose myself, but it was too late. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. I remember Sarah looking at me with a mix of frustration and hurt, and I remember David trying to console her, though I'm sure he was just as confused as everyone else. When the ceremony ended, there was an awkward round of applause, but no one was really celebrating. Everyone was just trying to process what had happened. The reception was equally uncomfortable. Sarah barely spoke to me. David avoided eye contact. The other guests, unsure of what to say, offered polite smiles, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. I tried to apologize to Sarah a few times, but each time she just brushed me off, too upset to even have a conversation about it. By the end of the night, I was feeling completely ashamed. I had somehow managed to make my best friend's wedding about me, the person who was supposed to be supporting her, and now I was the reason the entire day had been awkward. I tried to reach out to Sarah in the weeks following the wedding, but it wasn't the same. We haven't really spoken much since then. I don't think I'll ever fully be able to make up for how I ruined her special day. So yeah, TIFU by laughing uncontrollably during my best friend's wedding, making it one of the most awkward moments of my life, and probably losing a friend in the process. Don't laugh at weddings, especially when a crow is involved. It's a lesson I learned the hard way. TIFU by accidentally making a very awkward first impression at my new job. So, I recently started a new job and, like most people, I wanted to make a good first impression. I was excited about the opportunity, but I was also a little nervous. It was a big company with a lot of employees, and I had heard stories about the office culture being both friendly and professional, but also slightly eccentric. Being the new guy, I was hoping to fit in without standing out too much, but, well, I guess I got that wrong. It all started on my first day. I woke up early, picked out what I thought was a professional outfit, nothing too fancy, but polished enough to not look like a total slob. I grabbed a quick breakfast, made sure my backpack was packed with the essentials: laptop, notepad, pen, snacks, and left for work. It was a cold morning, so I was bundled up in a nice winter jacket, which I thought would help me blend in with the rest of the serious business vibes I had imagined for my first day. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by the receptionist, who directed me to the main conference room for a welcome meeting with HR. I tried my best to look confident, even though I felt like my palms were sweating. After all, I was starting a new chapter in my career, and I wanted to make the right impression from the get-go. I walked into the conference room, took a seat at the table, and tried to relax. Now, here's where things started to go sideways. As I was sitting there, I noticed that most of the other new hires seemed to be talking to each other, laughing, and generally enjoying their introductions. I was admittedly a little shy, but I tried to be friendly, so I gave a small smile and nodded at a couple of people. That's when it happened. I felt a sudden rumble in my stomach. It was one of those deep, unmistakable growls, the kind that you know is going to be loud enough for everyone to hear. I immediately tensed up. I hadn't eaten much for breakfast, and it looked like my stomach was letting me know it was time for a snack. I panicked, hoping it would pass, but the growl only got louder. I could feel my face turning red, and I couldn't decide whether to just laugh it off or pretend I hadn't heard it. But no, it was too loud. It was one of those moments where it felt like everyone in the room had to have heard it, and I was silently praying no one would comment on it. But of course, someone did. Just as I was trying to compose myself and focus on the HR representative, one of the other new hires, a guy who had been chatting away with a group nearby, turned to me and, with a grin on his face, asked, "Dude, is your stomach okay?" I think we all heard that. There it was. The comment that would haunt me for the rest of the day. I tried to play it cool and chuckled nervously, saying something like, "Yeah, I guess it's just a little hungry." But, of course, that only made it worse. The other people in the room started to laugh, and I could see a few eyes darting toward me, some trying to suppress their smiles, others looking at me like I was some kind of circus act. And that was only the beginning. The rest of the welcome meeting felt like it was stretching on forever. I couldn't focus on what the HR representative was saying. All I could think about was the fact that I had just made a fool of myself in front of a room full of strangers. I tried to act like everything was fine, but internally, I was cringing. It didn't help that, halfway through the meeting, my stomach decided to add insult to injury by growling again. This time, it was louder and more drawn out, like a slow, dramatic remembemble that echoed across the room. I think at that point, even the HR rep noticed. She gave me a sympathetic look, and then, in an attempt to save me from further embarrassment, she asked, "Does anyone need a snack break?" Of course. Everyone else immediately perked up and eagerly agreed, probably all too relieved that the attention was no longer on me. I felt like I was sinking lower and lower into my seat, my face hot with embarrassment. A few people shot me some knowing glances, and I heard one of them mutter, "Man, that's a serious case of the munchies." At this point, I just wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. But the meeting continued, and after what felt like an eternity, it finally wrapped up. The HR rep ushered us into a group of our new coworkers who were supposed to show us around the office. I tried to escape the awkwardness by focusing on the office tour, but it was hard to ignore the fact that everyone in the group seemed to know exactly who I was. They kept making little jokes about my hungry stomach, and every time I tried to explain that I wasn't that hungry, I just felt more embarrassed. It didn't help that one of my new colleagues kept offering me snacks from a bag they were carrying around, as though they were trying to feed the beast inside me. The rest of the day was equally uncomfortable. Every time I went to grab a coffee or walked past someone in the hallway, I could feel the awkward stares. It was like I had been branded as the guy whose stomach growls louder than anyone else's. By the time the day was over, I was absolutely exhausted. Not because I had done any serious work, but because I had spent the entire day battling the crushing weight of secondhand embarrassment. I had no idea how I was going to face my new coworkers tomorrow. Would they all think of me as the guy who couldn't keep his stomach in check? Would I forever be the office muncher? Fast forward a few days, and things started to calm down a little. People eventually stopped teasing me about my stomach growls, thankfully, but I learned a valuable lesson. Always eat a big breakfast before a big meeting. And maybe also don't wear a jacket that traps all your body heat, which makes you sweat and make your stomach even more noticeable. In the end, I got along just fine with everyone. We all laughed about it eventually, and I made some good connections at the company. But every time my stomach growls now, I still remember the first day, and just hope no one can hear it. TIFU by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding with a drunken speech. So, here we are. It's been almost a year, but I still can't go to any gatherings without someone bringing up that speech I gave at my best friend's wedding. If you're thinking of saying you should have known better, you are absolutely right, and I would give anything to go back and do things differently. But before I get ahead of myself, let me explain exactly how this nightmare unfolded. First off, you need some context. I've known Tom since we were in second grade. He's my best friend, my partner in crime, and if I'm being honest, he's always been the more responsible one between the two of us. You know the type, always on top of things, the planner, the one who keeps everyone else in check.
Me?
Not so much. I'm the guy who's a little more impulsive, a bit too spontaneous, and occasionally prone to making a fool of myself. When Tom asked me to be his best man, I was over the moon. I mean, it's an honor, right? Being asked to stand by someone's side on the biggest day of their life, to give a speech in front of all their family and friends? It was a big deal. Of course, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was going to be beautiful, an intimate ceremony followed by a reception at a fancy venue. Everything was going smoothly. Tom was excited, the bride was glowing, and I was ready to give a speech that would make everyone laugh, cry, and applaud me as the best man ever. Yeah, that's what I thought. Now, here's the thing. I'm not a great public speaker. I've always been the quiet guy, the one who cracks jokes at the bar with friends, but standing in front of a crowd? That's where things get a little dicey for me. I'm not good at memorizing things, and I wasn't about to read off a script like a robot. So, I decided to wing it. Big mistake, I know. The reception started with drinks flowing, and by the time it was my turn to give a speech, I'd had, let's just say, a few drinks too many. I didn't feel drunk, but I definitely wasn't sober. My brain was running a little slower than usual, but I convinced myself that I was in complete control. After all, I'm the best man, right? I've known Tom forever. How hard could this be? I stood up to grab the mic, and the first thing I noticed was that the room went completely silent. All eyes were on me, and in that moment, I immediately realized I had no idea what I was going to say. I panicked. Then, I remembered something. Tom and I have this long-running inside joke about embarrassing moments and stupid decisions. I thought to myself, why not start with that? It'll break the ice and get everyone laughing. So I dove right in. All right, I said, trying to sound confident. I've known Tom for over 20 years, and if there's one thing I know about him, it's that well, let's just say he's had his fair share of questionable decisions. The room chuckled.
Perfect.
I was on a roll. I mean, let's talk about the time he tried to start a band in college. He was awful, but he insisted he was the next big thing. I told him, Tom, just stick to being the responsible guy we all rely on and leave the music to people who don't sound like a dying cat. Another laugh. Good. Keep it going. And then there was that time he tried to make his own mixtape. Remember that, Tom? He called it Tommy Tunes, and every song was just him humming. It was like listening to a karaoke machine on fire. The crowd was laughing now, and I felt like I was nailing it. But here's where I went off track. I don't know what happened, but at some point during my speech, the alcohol took over. I started getting more and more comfortable, and I thought I could push the envelope a little further. So, I decided to share a personal story from when Tom and I went on a road trip after college. It was supposed to be a funny story, a harmless joke that would get a few laughs and add to the whole best friend vibe. What I didn't realize was that the story I was about to tell was about to make everyone incredibly uncomfortable. Okay, so speaking of questionable decisions, I continued. There was this one time Tom and I went on a road trip, and, well, let's just say we ended up at a strip club in the middle of nowhere. The room went dead silent. I could feel the tension immediately, but I didn't stop. Now, before you think this is going down a bad road, well, it kind of is, but hear me out. Tom was convinced it was a cultural experience and needed to study human behavior. I don't know what he thought he was doing, but let's just say the night ended with us both in the back of a van with a very angry bouncer and a lot of regrets. The silence was palpable. The bride's face had gone pale, and I could see her trying to subtly shake her head at me. But I didn't get it.
I thought they were just being shy.
I mean, Tom was like, I'm not even into this stuff. Man, I just wanted to see what the fuss was about. But honestly, I don't think anyone believes that, right? We all know that's not true. Anyway, I'll stop there, but yeah, good times. I looked around the room, expecting more laughter, but instead, I saw a lot of uncomfortable faces. People were shifting in their seats. Tom's face was red, and he was looking at me like he had just realized he'd made the worst mistake of his life by asking me to be his best man. Suddenly, I realized what I had done. It wasn't just the fact that I had shared a story about a strip club at his wedding, although that was bad enough. It was that I had painted Tom in a light that wasn't flattering. I had made him sound reckless and immature when, in reality, he was none of those things. He had a life, a career, and a loving fiancé. He had grown up, and here I was, embarrassing him in front of everyone who mattered to him. I tried to salvage it by making some self-deprecating joke, but it was too late. The damage was done. Tom got up from his seat, walked over to me, and without saying a word, grabbed the mic and cut my speech short. The crowd was still awkwardly silent. He ushered me off to the side, his face a mix of frustration and disappointment. I remember him saying, "What the hell is wrong with you? You embarrass me in front of everyone." The rest of the evening was a blur. I tried to apologize to Tom privately, but he wasn't having it. The bride was livid, and everyone could tell I had screwed up royally. It's been months now, and things have never been the same between Tom and me. We've talked, but I can tell the trust has been shaken. He hasn't fully forgiven me, and frankly, I don't blame him. I ruined his wedding day with a drunken speech that was supposed to be a light-hearted tribute, but instead, it turned into a nightmare. So, if you take anything away from this, let it be this. If you're ever asked to give a speech at someone's wedding, don't wing it, don't drink too much, and for the love of God, think before you speak. Because you might end up ruining the most important day of your best friend's life. TIFU by accidentally setting my neighbor's house on fire while trying to impress a girl. I never thought I would end up in this situation. To be fair, I didn't think I'd ever even be in this town long enough for anything like this to happen. But here we are, and now I'm the guy responsible for almost burning down a house, embarrassing myself in front of everyone, and possibly ruining any future chances with the girl of my dreams. It all started on a regular Saturday morning in late spring. I had just moved into a new neighborhood, not because I wanted to, but because my job relocated me. I'm a software developer, and my company thought I'd do better in the new office. Fine, whatever. It's a job, right? But I'm also a person who has a tendency to get a little too comfortable in my own routine. I tend to be a bit socially awkward, and don't really know how to make friends easily. Moving to a new town meant I had zero connections. So, I started doing what I always do, playing it safe and retreating into my shell. But everything changed when I saw her. It wasn't anything particularly special that day. I was sitting in my living room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when I heard the sound of laughter outside. I looked out the window and saw a group of people gathering in front of the house next door. They were having some kind of barbecue, and in the middle of the group, there she was. Her name was Emily, and she was perfect. She had this radiant smile, and the kind of energy that just pulled you in. I don't know how to describe it. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you were important just by talking to you. And I was staring like an idiot from the safety of my window. The worst part? I didn't even know how to talk to her. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I had to do something. I needed a reason to go outside. I needed to talk to her or, at the very least, be seen. So I put on my best I'm a cool guy face and decided that I was going to fix something in my front yard to look busy. Maybe that would make me seem approachable. At this point, I had lived in the house for about 2 weeks. I'd been putting off some minor repairs, including fixing a broken fence post. So, I grabbed my tools and went outside, hoping the sound of hammers and saws would give me that handyman charm that would get her attention. I had no idea how to do any of it, but I figured, hey, YouTube exists, right? I'm not the handiest guy, but I managed to wedge myself under the fence post, hammering away at the thing like I was a professional. And then, like a true genius, I had an idea. What if I show off some skills? Like setting up a fire pit. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fire pits are pretty standard backyard stuff. But I had this vision. I would build the fire pit, get it roaring, and maybe, just maybe, it would attract a crowd. Not just any crowd, but her crowd. So I called up my buddy Tom, a guy I'd met in the neighborhood, and who I knew was more knowledgeable about this stuff. He agreed to come over and help me out. After a few minutes of awkward introductions and small talk, we got to work. We decided to set up the fire pit in the most dramatic spot possible, right in the middle of my backyard, where everyone could see it from the street and the neighbor's yard. Tom said something about proper ventilation, fire safety, and all that, but I was too fixated on the idea of impressing Emily. We built the fire pit, stacked it with logs, and soon enough, we were ready to light it. At this point, I was feeling pretty good about myself. Emily and her friends were still outside, and I could tell they were talking and laughing near their barbecue. It was now or never. So, with all the confidence of someone who had no idea what they were doing, I struck the match and lit the fire pit. Everything went fine at first. The flames leaped up like they were supposed to, and I swear I thought I was looking at something straight out of a Pinterest DIY post. The logs crackled, the fire swirled with colors, and I stood there, proudly watching it burn like a king. But then things got out of hand. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but I think the fire pit didn't have enough air circulation. Maybe it wasn't positioned well, or I didn't stack the logs right, or I didn't use the right kind of wood. But suddenly, the flames shot up higher than they should have, and the wind picked up. 1 minute, I was standing there thinking, this is going to be great, I'm totally nailing this. And the next, I was watching the fire jump from the pit to the dry grass in my backyard. It spread in an instant, and I had no idea how to stop it. Tom, bless his heart, started panicking. Dude, the fire, he yelled. It's spreading. We need water. I looked around, completely lost. The fire was growing, and now I could hear the wind picking up even more, pushing the flames toward the neighbor's house. The last thing I wanted was for Emily to see me burn down her yard. That was not a good look. I ran to the garden hose, but it was kinked, and I couldn't get any water out. So, naturally, in a moment of pure genius, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a bucket. Not a bucket of water, mind you, but a bucket of used grilling coals. Yeah, that's right. I thought the ashes and cinders from last night's barbecue would somehow help me put out the fire. Spoiler alert, they didn't. By the time I realized that the ashes were doing absolutely nothing, the fire had already jumped over the fence and was creeping dangerously close to the neighbor's house. I had 1 second to decide whether to just run or try to do something heroic. I panicked, of course. I grabbed a shovel, tried to dig a fire break, and in the process, I managed to knock over the bucket of hot coals. This sent sparks flying even further toward the neighbor's backyard. At that point, it wasn't just my backyard that was on fire. The fence was now burning, and the neighbor's shed was in flames. Emily had seen everything. Within minutes, the entire street was lit up with emergency vehicle lights. The fire truck showed up, and I stood there in complete horror while the firemen worked to put out the blaze. By some miracle, no one was hurt, and only a portion of the neighbor's fence and shed were damaged. But still, that was my fault. I was the idiot who tried to impress a girl by playing with fire and almost set an entire neighborhood ablaze. The worst part? Emily wasn't impressed. She was horrified. She didn't even want to look at me after that.
So, yeah.
I'll never try to impress anyone with a fire pit again. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where trying to build a fire to impress someone, just don't. Seriously. Hey, friends. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by getting my boss arrested after trying to impress him with my genius idea. So, I've been working at this company for a couple of years now. I'm in the marketing department, and while my role isn't the most glamorous, I like the work. The pay is decent, and the people are friendly. My boss, Dave, is a cool guy too. He's laid back, but he definitely knows what he's doing. That being said, I've always felt a bit like a yes man in the office. I don't really stand out much, and I've always wanted to prove that I've got what it takes to make a big impact. This is where the whole mess started. A few weeks ago, I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. There was a big company-wide meeting coming up, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to finally show Dave and the higher-ups that I could contribute something truly valuable. So, I started brainstorming. I had been reading a lot about viral marketing and how companies are increasingly using unconventional, out-of-the-box strategies to get attention. After some deep thinking and maybe a little too much caffeine, I came up with an idea I was sure would knock everyone's socks off. I would orchestrate a fake scandal involving the company's biggest competitor. The idea was simple: create an elaborate ruse that looked like our competitor had done something illegal and let the media frenzy take over. All we had to do was subtly leak some evidence, and the world would fall for it. In the chaos, our company would look like the only safe and trustworthy option. It was perfect. I mean, who wouldn't fall for that? I was absolutely convinced it would work, so I went ahead and drafted a plan. I had everything figured out: fake emails, fabricated insider information, a well-timed anonymous tip to the press. I was going to be the mastermind behind the next big corporate scandal, and it was all going to bring our company into the spotlight for the right reasons. I even convinced myself it would make me look like a genius. I could already hear the accolades coming my way. The next step was to get Dave on board. I wasn't sure how he'd react since this was, a little extreme. But I'd been working with him long enough to know that he appreciated bold ideas, and I figured he'd respect the creativity. So I called him into my office and laid out the plan. He listened carefully, nodding as I went through all the details. He didn't seem as enthusiastic as I had hoped, but he didn't shut me down either. He said something like, "I like where your head's at, but this could get out of hand quickly. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" But in my mind, his hesitation was just a sign that he was impressed by the scope of my idea. I thought it was just a matter of him seeing the brilliance in it, so I reassured him that everything would be fine. After all, what could go wrong? Fast forward a couple of days. I'm sitting at my desk, feeling like the king of the office, watching the early stages of my plan unfold. I'd managed to get the fake emails out to a few key people, including a well-known influencer in the business world who had a history of stirring up drama. I sent a message to one of the reporters at a major news outlet, tipping them off about the breaking news I had created. The scandal was out there, and it was only a matter of time before the media picked up on it. But what I didn't expect was that it would blow up so quickly. Within hours, the story was everywhere. News outlets were running with the scandal, and people were starting to ask questions. I felt a rush of adrenaline. Everything was working exactly as I had planned. Then, to my shock, the police showed up at our office. At first, I thought it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe they were investigating the competitor, and it was all part of the news cycle. But then I saw one of the detectives talking to Dave. He looked worried. Really worried. I don't know if you've ever seen someone who is about to get arrested, but it's a look that sticks with you. I froze. My stomach sank. Dave was being escorted out of the office, and I had no idea what was going on. I rushed over to the situation, hoping I could clarify what had happened. The detective told me that Dave was being arrested for conspiracy to defraud and misleading authorities. I was in total disbelief. What the hell was happening? Apparently, the tip I had leaked wasn't just a hoax. It had gotten so big that it had attracted the attention of real law enforcement. They believed that our company had orchestrated the entire thing to ruin the competitor, and they had enough evidence to arrest Dave. I stood there in complete shock as Dave was taken away in handcuffs, still trying to process what had just happened. The detective turned to me and asked if I knew anything about the scandal, and I couldn't even lie at that point. My mind was racing, and the only thing I could think to say was, it was my idea. At that moment, I realized the full extent of what I had done. I had single-handedly turned my boss into a criminal. The look in Dave's eyes when I said that haunted me. After they left, I was left standing in the office, completely panicked. My phone started ringing, the media wanted comment, and my colleagues were asking if everything was all right. I couldn't even form a sentence. I had created the biggest disaster I could imagine, all because I wanted to prove myself. What had started as an attempt to impress my boss had ended in his arrest. I immediately reached out to Dave's lawyer, trying to figure out how to fix this mess. Spoiler alert, there was no easy way to fix it. The aftermath of the whole fiasco was a nightmare. It turns out that the competitor wasn't even involved in the scandal. I had fabricated everything, and now I was the one who had made the biggest mistake of my life. Dave was suspended, and the company was under investigation. The media painted us as a shady organization, and our stock prices plummeted. To make matters worse, the company fired me for my involvement. I guess I shouldn't have expected anything different. I had sabotaged my entire career with one terrible decision. Long story short, I learned a valuable lesson. Be careful what you wish for, especially when it comes to trying to impress people with ideas that you don't fully think through. I'm now looking for work again, but I'm pretty sure that my time as a marketing genius has come to an end. TIFU by accidentally setting off a chain of events that ruined my friend's wedding and nearly got me arrested. I never considered myself the type of person who would ruin something as important as a wedding. I mean, who would? It's the biggest day of someone's life, right? But somehow, against all logic and reason, I managed to do just that. This all happened last summer, and I've been trying to process it ever since. But now that it's in the rearview mirror, I thought I'd share the chaotic disaster that unfolded that day. It all started with an invitation to my old friend Jenny's wedding. Jenny and I grew up together in a small town. We weren't exactly best friends in school, but over the years, we became close after reconnecting at a high school reunion. She had always been an eccentric person, super artistic, into DIY crafts, and more than a little chaotic in the way she lived her life. So when she told me she was getting married, I was thrilled for her, but also braced myself for some unorthodox decisions in the wedding plans. Sure enough, Jenny had some unusual ideas. The venue was a large barn in the middle of nowhere, which was cute in theory, but the nearest hotel was a good 30-minute drive away. She insisted on a full, outdoor ceremony and reception, even though the forecast called for thunderstorms all week leading up to the event. But she was set on it. It was going to be beautiful, she said. Rain or shine. The wedding day arrived, and I found myself in the middle of nowhere, standing in a muddy field in a too-tight bridesmaid dress, hoping it wouldn't rain. Of course, it started raining just an hour before the ceremony. Everyone scrambled to move the ceremony inside the barn. Jenny was almost in tears, worried about her dream wedding being ruined. But she handled it like she always did, with a calm, collected, "We'll just roll with it." The ceremony itself was actually pretty beautiful despite the rain. Jenny was radiant, and her husband Greg looked incredibly happy. I was just trying not to trip over my heels while holding the bouquet and praying I wouldn't get caught in the moment and burst into tears. Then came the reception, and this is where everything went off the rails. I had been asked to help with some of the decorations. Nothing too complicated, just arranging some candles and placing flowers on the tables. I had only been at the barn for an hour before the wedding started, so I was still trying to get my bearings in a space that was, to be blunt, a logistical nightmare. The barn was dark, cramped, and smelled faintly of livestock. It had been transformed into a chic wedding venue, but you could still tell it was, well, a barn. Now, here's where I made my mistake. During the reception, I got to chatting with some of the other bridesmaids and guests. At one point, someone mentioned that Jenny had set up a wedding time capsule that people could drop things into, notes, mementos, anything they thought would be special to look back on after years of marriage. It was a sweet idea, and I thought it was pretty clever, especially because Jenny had made the capsule herself out of an antique wooden box she found at a flea market. I got curious. I thought it might be fun to sneak over and see what was inside this time capsule, just for a moment. Jenny was busy talking to her family and wasn't paying attention, so I casually wandered over to the corner where the box was placed. It was sitting on a table by itself, locked, but there was a small padlock with a key hanging beside it. Here's where I made my colossal mistake. I thought it would be funny to unlock the box, open it, and take a quick peek inside. Just to see what kinds of things people had dropped in. I had no intention of messing anything up. But the moment I turned the key and lifted the lid, I immediately realized that something was off. The box was not filled with personal notes and little trinkets, like I expected. Instead, it was filled with fireworks. And not just any fireworks. These were those long, cylindrical sparklers and firecrackers, things that were clearly not meant to be inside a wooden box at a wedding. I stared at them for a second, my brain scrambling to process the situation. It didn't make sense. Jenny had never mentioned fireworks in relation to her wedding. Then, the panic set in. The box was nestled on top of a tablecloth, and underneath it, there was a loose cord. I followed the cord with my eyes and realized it was connected to something much larger. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the small device on the floor, a homemade firework launcher. At that moment, I realized what had happened. Jenny, in her infinite wisdom, had somehow decided that her wedding would be the perfect occasion to surprise everyone with a grand finale, a literal fireworks show inside the barn. But she had forgotten one important detail: fireworks and barns don't mix well. The box of fireworks wasn't part of a well-thought-out plan. It was an accident waiting to happen. I tried to slam the box shut, but it was too late. Just as I turned to leave, I must have knocked something, or perhaps my knee brushed against the launcher, because I heard a faint fizzing sound followed by a small explosion. My heart sank. The next few seconds felt like hours. A small firecracker went off in the corner, setting off a chain reaction with the rest of the fireworks. Panic swept through the room. People screamed. Tables tipped over as guests scrambled to escape the barn. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't believe I had just triggered a fireworks show that was far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. Thankfully, the fire department arrived quickly. Too quickly, really. The barn was evacuated, and while no one was injured, it was chaos. The wedding was ruined. The reception was canceled. And, to make matters worse, the authorities started asking questions. Jenny, visibly upset, turned to me, her face pale, and asked, "Did you touch the box?" I had no choice but to confess. I admitted that I had opened the time capsule. Jenny was beyond furious. The fire department had to clear the place out, and because of the chaos I had caused, Jenny and Greg's wedding had to be rescheduled. The aftermath wasn't pretty. Jenny and I didn't speak for weeks. She refused to acknowledge that what happened was an accident, and to be honest, I didn't blame her. I had ruined her big day. A few months later, after some space and a lot of apologizing, Jenny and I started talking again. She eventually forgave me, but it took a long time. I think, deep down, I'll always carry the weight of what happened. It wasn't intentional, but that didn't make it any less damaging.
So yeah.
That's the story of how I accidentally ruined my friend's wedding and almost got arrested for it. Let it be a lesson to everyone. Never open a mysterious wooden box at a wedding, no matter how curious you are. You never know when it's going to be packed with fireworks that'll send you straight to the doghouse. TIFU by accidentally setting my best friend's house on fire with a homemade candle. I never considered myself particularly crafty or the type of person who would try to make my own candles. However, a few weeks ago, my best friend, Jenna, had a birthday coming up, and I wanted to give her something unique and personal. After some thinking, I decided I would make her a custom candle, something that no one else could give her. I thought it would be cute, thoughtful, and honestly, a lot cheaper than buying a high-end candle from a store. I spent days planning and getting all the necessary supplies. I went online to look up candle-making tutorials, which seemed simple enough. Wax, wicks, fragrance oils, and containers. It looked like a piece of cake. I was confident that I could pull it off. I even watched a few YouTube videos, mostly of overly enthusiastic people showing off their DIY candle making skills while making everything look effortless. I thought, how hard can it be? I spent an afternoon going to the craft store, gathering everything from wax pellets to cute glass jars. I had it all: lavender-scented wax, a charming little jar with a vintage look, and some gold foil stickers to make the jar look extra special. I was ready to dive into this project. The first step seemed straightforward: melt the wax. I found an old pot, and after checking with my mom about how to melt wax safely, she wasn't the least bit impressed by my new hobby. I set to work on the stovetop. I'd read you should use a double boiler, but I was too lazy to figure that out. Instead, I just placed the wax directly into the pot. After some time, it started melting, and it looked like I was on the right track. However, the wax took longer than expected to melt. I realized my mistake when it started smoking. I panicked, yanked the pot off the stove, and placed it on the counter. But it was too late. The whole kitchen smelled like burning wax, and I was a bit freaked out. I thought I had somehow messed up the entire thing, but the wax still looked fine, so I decided to keep going. I added the fragrance oil, poured it into the jar, and inserted the wick. I thought the hardest part was over, but I hadn't realized that the pot was still a little too hot to handle. As I carefully moved the melted wax to the counter, I must have brushed the edge of the pot against the dish towel on the counter, which had been conveniently placed next to a stack of paper napkins. This is where things really started to go south. The moment the hot wax touched the towel, it caught fire. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. I thought I'd just knocked the towel onto the stovetop, but no, it was blazing. I froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. It all happened so quickly, and before I could figure out what to do, the flames spread to the paper napkins. I grabbed the towel and tried to throw it into the sink, but the fire was already too big. I dashed to grab the fire extinguisher from under the sink and, in a panic, pulled the trigger. Now, I've never used a fire extinguisher before, and while the fire did go out, I quickly realized that I had no idea what I was doing. Instead of just using the extinguisher to douse the fire, I had sprayed the entire kitchen with the foam. It was everywhere: the walls, the counters, the floor, even the ceiling. It looked like a war zone, but at least the fire was out. I stood there, staring at the damage. The kitchen was covered in foam and soot, the smell of burnt wax and fire extinguisher lingering in the air. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. What was supposed to be a sweet, thoughtful gift had turned into a catastrophic disaster. The fire had left scorch marks on the counter, the towel was completely ruined, and I had no idea how to clean up the mess that the fire extinguisher foam had caused. To make matters worse, I had to clean up before Jenna came over. Her birthday was in a couple of hours, and she was supposed to arrive any minute. I quickly threw the pot into the sink to try to salvage it. It was ruined, and I wiped down the counters as best as I could. But there was no hiding the fact that my little DIY project had gone horribly wrong. When Jenna finally arrived, she walked into the kitchen, immediately smelling the remnants of fire and foam. She stared at the wreckage for a moment, looking confused. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. I tried to laugh it off, but I was clearly frazzled. I tried making you a candle," I said, gesturing toward the burnt remnants of the project on the counter. She burst into laughter, which didn't help my nerves at all. "You tried to make a candle, and you almost burned the place down?" I sheepishly nodded, explaining the whole disaster. She was actually really sweet about it and didn't seem mad at all, but I was mortified. Not only had I failed at making her a candle, but I'd also nearly caused a house fire. At this point, I knew I'd probably never be able to live it down. In the end, I took her out to dinner to make up for the destroyed kitchen and presented her with a store-bought candle. We laughed about the fire for weeks after, and Jenna would always joke that I should never try to make candles again. So, moral of the story: if you decide to make a candle as a thoughtful gift, make sure you know what you're doing. Otherwise, you might just end up with a kitchen full of foam and a fire extinguisher to clean up afterward. And remember, no matter how great the idea seems, sometimes it's better to just buy the gift. Or, at the very least, research how to melt wax properly. TIFU by accidentally sending my ex a heartfelt letter meant for my new girlfriend, and now I'm single again. So, a bit of context. I recently started seeing someone new. Her name is Claire, and we met at work a few months ago. We've been taking things slow, but she's awesome, funny, and actually seems to like me for who I am, not just because I'm some office guy. We've been on a few dates, had some great conversations, and honestly, it was looking like it could turn into something more. I was starting to get attached, in the best way. Now, a bit of backstory on my ex, Sarah. We were together for about 3 years, and things ended pretty messily. We had a lot of good times, but our relationship just wasn't working anymore. I don't want to go into all the details, but there was a lot of emotional baggage, and in the end, it felt like we just couldn't make it work. I had to block her on all social media after a while, and for a long time I didn't think much about her. But every now and then, I'd get that familiar pang of regret and nostalgia. It's a normal part of the breakup process, right? A few weeks ago, I was doing some random cleaning out of old emails and messages, and I stumbled upon a folder with all sorts of old stuff from my time with Sarah. Old birthday cards, photos, and a ton of messages I'd completely forgotten about. It was one of those walk down memory lane moments, but instead of feeling bitter, I felt nostalgic in the most wistful way. I found a draft of a letter I had written to her back when we were on good terms. I never sent it. It was this long, emotional thing about how I still cared for her, but I needed to find myself. It was like reading a letter from someone I used to be. That letter sat there, unfinished, gathering dust. And, despite everything, I realized I still felt some kind of attachment to Sarah, even if we were broken up. I thought, maybe I should send it. Maybe it would give us some kind of closure. Or maybe it would help me finally let go. Fast forward a few days, and Claire and I had just had a great date. We went to this cozy little restaurant, had amazing conversations, and shared some laughs. She texted me afterward, saying she had a great time and was looking forward to seeing me again. I was on cloud nine. I was thinking about how lucky I was and how much I wanted to keep building this relationship with her. That night, I felt this overwhelming desire to write something nice, something heartfelt, and just tell her how much I appreciated her. Now, here's where things start to get bad. I had that old letter from Sarah still open on my laptop. I thought to myself, okay, I'll write Claire something similar. A little note to tell her how great she is, how I feel. I started typing and, in the haze of post-date excitement, I got lost in the words. I was so caught up in how much I was starting to like Claire that the letter just flowed. It wasn't a copy of the old one, but it was definitely drawing from the same emotional well. As I was finishing the letter, I thought, I should send this to her now. She'll love it. I sent it. Immediately. But here's the thing, I hadn't double-checked my recipients. I still had the old letter draft open from Sarah. And even worse, the draft I had been editing in the same tab was her email address. Not Claire's. Sarah's. So, in my excitement, I sent what I thought was a cute, romantic message meant for Claire to none other than my ex. The woman I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The woman I'd blocked. The woman I thought was safely out of my life. The email hit me with the reality, like a punch to the gut. I realized what I had done, and instantly my stomach dropped. There was no undo button. The damage was done. My phone pinged with an incoming email notification, and I knew exactly what it was. I stared at my phone for a solid 5 minutes, my heart racing. I didn't open the email, but the subject line was enough to make my blood run cold. I've been thinking about us. That was the title of the letter I had accidentally sent. That's when the panic really set in. It was a full-on spiral. My first instinct was to text Claire, explain what happened, but how could I explain this without sounding like an idiot? And what if she thought I was some kind of messed up guy who had unresolved feelings for his ex? Not to mention, she had no idea I had even dated Sarah, so this was going to be a huge shock for her. But before I could come up with a plan, my phone buzzed again. Another email notification. I opened it this time. Why are you sending me this? We haven't talked in over a year. It was Sarah. Of course it was. She didn't mince words. The email was cold, blunt, and so uncomfortable. It was like she was calling me out on some weird form of emotional manipulation. And to be fair, I kind of deserved it. I had no reason to reach out, no reason to try to rekindle things. I felt like an idiot, and I felt guilty. But most of all, I felt like a fool. I took a deep breath and realized I needed to stop this spiral before it completely ruined my chances with Claire. I quickly sent a message to Sarah, apologizing, explaining that it was an accident, and that I never should have sent that letter. I reassured her that I had moved on, and that I hoped she was doing well. Then I put my phone down and went into damage control mode. I texted Claire as quickly as I could, trying to explain what happened. But my fingers were shaking, and nothing came out the way I wanted it to. I basically just rambled about how I wasn't that kind of person, that I didn't have any feelings for Sarah anymore, and that this was all one big mistake. The response from Claire wasn't what I was hoping for. "I'm not sure what's going on, but this feels a bit much. I think we need to talk about this in person." I immediately felt the weight of my stupid decision. The letter, the email to Sarah, the mess with Claire, it was all too much. The emotional roller coaster of the past hour had left me feeling drained, embarrassed, and unsure if I even deserved to be with someone like Claire. The next day, Claire and I met up. She was kind but distant. We talked, and I tried to explain myself. She listened, but in the end, she told me she needed some space to think. I understood. How could she trust me after something like this? Long story short, we broke up. She said she couldn't be in a relationship where there was unresolved baggage from an ex. And while I understood her reasoning, it didn't make it hurt any less. So yeah, TIFU by trying to be romantic and heartfelt, and ended up sabotaging a relationship with the woman I was starting to fall for. I learned that sometimes letting go of the past means truly letting it go. TIFU by accidentally sending a risque text to my mom instead of my girlfriend. So this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still cringing every time I think about it. I'm in my mid-20s, and my girlfriend and I have been dating for a little over a year now. Things have been going really well, and we're at that stage where we're comfortable enough with each other that we share a lot of personal things. In fact, the night this disaster happened, we were texting each other some pretty steamy stuff, which led to the worst texting mistake of my life. Let me set the stage. My girlfriend and I were texting throughout the day as usual. We had plans to meet up later that evening for a nice dinner and to hang out at her place. But for most of the day, we had been exchanging some, let's say, suggestive messages. Nothing too graphic, just some flirtatious teasing back and forth. By the time I got to work, I was feeling particularly playful and started sending her some pretty spicy texts. I'd never been shy about it, and I figured it was harmless fun. At one point, I found myself in a lull at work, sitting at my desk and just scrolling through my phone. My girlfriend had sent me one of those "you won't believe what I'm wearing right now" messages, and I felt the rush of excitement. I decided to send her a text that was, let's say, bold. I'd planned to be really cheeky and send a message along the lines of, "Can't wait to see you later. I'm already getting excited just thinking about what you'll do to me when we're alone." Pretty normal stuff for us, or so I thought. But here's where I messed up. My mom had texted me earlier in the day, asking about some family plans for the weekend, and I had kept the conversation open in a different window. That's the first part of the mess up. My mom texts a lot, and when I'm in the middle of something, I sometimes forget to check who I'm texting. So I typed out the message to my girlfriend. Or so I thought. I hit send and immediately felt a strange sense of unease. I sat there for a second, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. But before I could figure it out, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a reply. I opened the message, eagerly anticipating my girlfriend's reaction to my flirtatious message. Instead, my screen was filled with a reply from my mom. "What the hell, son? Seriously? I think you need to explain yourself." My heart immediately stopped. I stared at the screen for a few moments in complete disbelief. There, in plain text, was my mom's response to my incredibly suggestive message. "Can't wait to see you later. I'm already getting excited just thinking about what you'll do to me when we're alone."
I just about had a panic attack.
I frantically started scrolling through the conversation to double-check. Yes, that was the exact message I had sent. But I had meant to send it to my girlfriend, not my mom. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I had been so bold with the text that it was both deeply embarrassing and incredibly awkward. My mom was now reading these words, and I couldn't even begin to understand what she was thinking. My brain was racing. My stomach felt like it had dropped to the floor. I could feel my face turning redder and redder. I immediately started typing a response to my mom, trying to explain that I had totally meant to send that message to my girlfriend. But of course, my words were coming out all wrong. I kept typing, deleting, and retyping, but none of it felt right. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I decided to just be honest. I sent this message. "Oh my God, Mom, I am so sorry. That was meant for my girlfriend.
I didn't mean for you to see that.
Please, I beg you to pretend like you never read that." The response came back within seconds. "You're lucky I'm not disowning you. And don't you ever send me a message like that again. This is your warning, young man." At that point, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was mortified. How was I ever going to look at my mom this same way again? And what made it worse was that my mom wasn't the type to let things slide easily. She was the, "Oh, I'll bring it up when you least expect it" type. I could already hear her mentioning it at family gatherings or worse, in front of my dad. Now, I had to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to leave the conversation there, so I quickly texted my girlfriend to explain the mix-up. Thankfully, she was understanding and found it pretty funny. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to be hearing about this for a long time. My girlfriend responded with something along the lines of, "Well, looks like your mom got an early preview of our future together," followed by a laughing emoji. I, on the other hand, was still dying inside. I mean, I couldn't shake the thought of my mom reading that message. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd want your mom to know about, you know? The rest of the day went by in a blur, and I couldn't wait to get home and try to forget what had happened. But as luck would have it, when I got home, my mom was there, and she had that "I have a secret" look on her face. I was bracing for the worst, but she didn't say anything, at least not right away. Instead, she casually mentioned that she didn't need to know that much about my relationship and told me to be more careful next time. I think she's still holding on to this one for some reason. Every now and then, she'll drop a comment like, "Hope you and your girlfriend are having fun with your activities," with a smirk, and I just about die inside every time. In the end, I guess I learned a very important lesson that day. Double-check who you're texting before hitting send, especially if your mom happens to be in the mix. Now, whenever I text my girlfriend anything even remotely flirtatious, I triple-check the recipient. The last thing I need is to be subjected to my mom's teasing for the rest of my life. TIFU by accidentally setting off my entire building's fire alarm because I was trying to make toast. So, here's the thing. I've never been a particularly good cook. I mean, I can make cereal, pasta, scrambled eggs, and basic stuff like that, but anything more complicated? Forget about it. That said, I always figured that making toast was a simple enough task.
How hard could it be, right?
You just pop a couple of slices in the toaster, wait for the pop, and voila, breakfast. Well, that was the theory. Reality, however, had other plans. It all started this morning. I woke up late, again, and was running behind for work. My morning routine was a blur, but I knew I had to get something into my stomach before I rushed out the door. I didn't have time for anything elaborate, so I grabbed a loaf of bread, threw 2 slices into the toaster, and went on my way to get the coffee brewing. I've used this toaster a million times, and it's pretty straightforward. But apparently, today, the universe had a special treat for me. About a minute later, I heard a strange smell. It was like burnt rubber mixed with something else, a little too smoky for just a toaster. I figured maybe the crumbs had caught fire or something, but I didn't think much of it. I've heard the toast pop a bit earlier than expected on occasion, so I was just thinking maybe I had set it too high. No big deal. I pulled the toast out and immediately realized the problem. The slices weren't just well done, they were charred. The edges were blackened, and there was a faint trail of smoke coming off them.
Great.
I had a burnt offering instead of breakfast. Not wanting to deal with cleaning up the mess and trying to salvage the charred remains of my breakfast, I tossed the toast in the trash and went to open a window. The smell of burnt toast was starting to spread, and I didn't want the whole place to reek of it. That's when it happened. The fire alarm went off. Now, I live in an apartment building, so the fire alarm is loud. Really loud. It's like a siren designed to make sure you never ignore it, even if it's 6 a.m. and you're still in bed. I panicked. I immediately ran to the kitchen and tried to wave the smoke out with a towel. But no, the alarm wasn't having any of it. The smoke was too thick for my feeble attempts to clear the air. I then thought, maybe if I hit the reset button on the smoke detector, it'll stop. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and started fiddling with the smoke detector on the ceiling, but I couldn't reach it. The fire alarm was still blaring, and I was starting to get frustrated. I ran back to the kitchen to try and fan the smoke out faster. But as I rushed back into the kitchen, I noticed something that completely slipped my mind during the panic. The toaster was still plugged in. It was still hot, and there were still some faint tendrils of smoke coming from it. I had forgotten to turn it off. I frantically pulled the toaster's plug out of the socket, but by then, the damage was done. The fire alarm was wailing as loudly as ever, and it wasn't stopping. I had the distinct feeling that my entire building knew I had messed up, and they were probably getting ready to call the fire department. My heart raced. What if someone thought there was an actual fire? What if the fire department showed up and saw me standing there in my pajamas, completely unable to explain why the alarm was going off? What if the other tenants were already standing outside, ready to confront me for causing this ridiculous scene? I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed the building's emergency number. I explained the situation, apologizing profusely for the alarm. The operator on the other end was understanding but clearly annoyed. "You're going to have to call the fire department if the alarm doesn't stop," she said. "Just hang tight. We'll send someone up to check."
Great.
Now I had to wait for the fire department to arrive. The whole building was probably awake by now, and I could just imagine everyone standing outside their doors, wondering why the heck I was causing this chaos. I ran back to the door to make sure I had my shoes on in case I had to bolt out of the apartment. I even threw on a jacket to look a little less ridiculous. At least if the fire department came, I wouldn't be in my pajamas anymore. I had fully accepted that I was going to have to face the music. About 10 minutes passed, but the fire alarm was still going strong. I was pacing around, debating whether I should try to get the attention of the neighbors and ask if they heard it too. But honestly, I didn't want to know what they were thinking. It was bad enough that my own apartment felt like an inferno from the smell of the burnt toast. Just when I thought I was going to lose it, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I rushed to the door and saw a building maintenance guy standing there with a confused look on his face. Hey, I'm here to check the alarm," he said. I immediately explained that the fire alarm had gone off because I accidentally burned some toast. The guy just stared at me for a moment, then let out a long sigh. "You burned toast?" he asked, looking at the ceiling where the alarm was still blaring. "Yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous," I said, feeling my face burn with embarrassment. I didn't think it was this serious. "I'm so sorry." At this point, he nodded and gave me a half smile. "Well, you're not the first. Just don't burn any more toast, all right?" With that, he walked over to the smoke detector and reset it. Finally, the blaring noise stopped. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was going to survive this morning after all. The maintenance guy gave me one last look, then left without saying much else. I stood there in stunned silence, my heart still racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I'd set off the fire alarm for burning toast. This was definitely going to be something I would remember for a long time. The worst part? As I was standing there, catching my breath, I realized I was still hungry. I hadn't eaten breakfast. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I went out and bought a bagel. No more toasters for me. But hey, at least I'll never forget how easily toast can ruin your life. TIFU by accidentally exposing my deepest secret to my entire family at a reunion. So, let me set the stage. It was supposed to be a typical family reunion. My relatives are a pretty tight-knit bunch, but we don't see each other as often as we'd like because everyone is scattered across the country. My parents live in the Midwest, I live on the West Coast, and my siblings are somewhere in between. So when the reunion was announced, everyone was excited. There was a huge buzz leading up to the event, and I was no exception. It was going to be a weekend of catching up, eating, and embarrassing each other with old family photos. Nothing too crazy, right? My family has always been a little bit chaotic, but in a loving, wholesome way. However, the one thing that has always been a bit of a sore spot for me is the fact that my family tends to overshare. I'm not a fan of public vulnerability, and I've always been the type to keep my personal life fairly private. In fact, I've always kept my romantic life especially under wraps. I didn't even tell my parents about my last serious relationship. They knew I was dating someone, but beyond that, I kept things under wraps. I'd always been embarrassed by my lack of success in relationships, and honestly, I never felt like it was anyone's business. That is, until this past weekend. So, there I was, standing in the kitchen of my aunt's house, chatting with my cousins while we worked together on making appetizers. The whole family was slowly trickling in, and everything was going according to plan. But, as with every family reunion, someone was bound to drop a bomb. That someone, as it turns out, was my older brother. Now, my brother is the kind of person who thinks it's hilarious to tease people. He's also the kind of person who has no filter, and whenever he gets even the slightest hint of a juicy piece of gossip, he will not rest until the entire family knows. This is especially true when it comes to me. I have been the target of his jokes for years, and though I typically roll with it, I can't say it doesn't annoy me. But I'd learned to ignore it and laugh along, knowing that it was all in good fun. But then he dropped the bomb. We were in the kitchen, standing around the island when he casually says, "So, has anyone heard about Dave's secret life? You know, his little escapades on the side." My heart stopped. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the immediate dread that flooded my body told me that whatever it wasn't good. "Dave, what's he talking about?" My cousin Jill, who I'm particularly close to, turned to me with a quizzical expression. Now, let me clarify something. Escapades is not a term anyone in my family would ever use lightly. It implies something scandalous, something potentially embarrassing. And I had no clue how my brother had found out about whatever this secret life was, but I immediately knew it wasn't something I wanted the whole family to know. What do you mean by escapades?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant while my pulse quickened. My brother, clearly enjoying the chaos he was about to unleash, grinned and said, "Oh, you know, those little secret dates you've been having for the last couple of years. All the ones you're too embarrassed to tell mom and dad about." My stomach dropped into my feet. My entire world suddenly seemed to tilt. I was in complete and utter shock. What the hell was he talking about? And that's when my brain finally processed what was happening. Let me back up here and explain something crucial. About 3 years ago, I had gotten involved in a relationship that I kept entirely to myself. I had met someone through a dating app, and things quickly escalated. This wasn't a typical relationship. This was a relationship I wasn't sure I wanted to be in, but didn't know how to get out of. The person I was seeing was a little eccentric, to put it nicely. They had a very unconventional lifestyle and made decisions that didn't exactly line up with my family's values. But the worst part? I never felt like I could be upfront about it, especially with my conservative family. So, I kept it all a secret. Now, as fate would have it, after about a year of this secret relationship, it came to a messy, dramatic end. I cut ties with that person, but it was far from clean. There were a lot of lingering feelings, awkward run-ins, and some uncomfortable moments. But I thought that I had managed to bury the whole thing. I didn't tell anyone about the details. I certainly didn't tell my family. And for the most part, I thought it was behind me. But apparently my brother had somehow found out. "How do you know about that?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. "Oh, come on. You didn't think I wouldn't figure it out," he said with an exaggerated eye roll. "I mean, it's not like you were exactly good at keeping it a secret. You know, sneaking out at all hours, weird texts, accidental mentions of their name in conversation." At this point, the entire kitchen had fallen silent. All eyes were on me, including my parents, who had just walked in. "Dave," my mom asked, her voice suddenly serious. "What's this about secret dates? You never said anything about this." And just like that, I felt every ounce of tension in my body hit its breaking point. I knew there was no hiding it anymore. The truth was out. I had been caught red-handed, and all my carefully constructed walls had crumbled in one fell swoop. I could feel my face flush, the heat rising as I looked around the room at my family's expectant faces. "Well," I said, trying to sound casual even though I was dying inside, "it's a long story. But yeah, I was seeing someone a while back. It was just complicated, and I didn't feel like it was the right time to talk about it. My mom's eyes widened. How long did this go on, and why didn't you tell us? We could have supported you, Dave. Yeah, my dad chimed in. I'm disappointed, but I understand if you were scared or unsure. You should have trusted us enough to talk about it. The whole family was looking at me with a mixture of concern and confusion. And then, as if to make everything worse, my younger cousin Lucy, who I'd always thought was the sweet, innocent one, raised her hand and asked, "Were they really weird? Like in a bad way?" I could feel my life flashing before my eyes. I had been outed. My secret was no longer mine. Everyone in that room knew something that I wasn't prepared to talk about. And that's when I realized something that made it all even worse. My brother was smirking. He had done this on purpose. He had exposed me to the entire family for a laugh. As the conversation continued, with my family asking all sorts of questions I wasn't ready to answer, I realized the weekend had officially turned into a disaster. What was supposed to be a joyful reunion had turned into a deep dive into my most personal life. So, yeah, TIFU by not keeping my romantic life even a little bit private. And now, I have a whole family who knows way too much about my past relationships, all thanks to my brother's big mouth. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with an extravagant home-cooked dinner and accidentally burning down my house. So, I, 28M, recently decided to step up my game and impress a girl I've been seeing. Let's call her Sarah, 26F. We'd been talking for a few months, and I could tell she was starting to like me. She dropped hints about how she appreciated good home-cooked meals, and the fact that I was somewhat decent in the kitchen. I can make a decent pasta and scrambled eggs. So, I'm a chef in my own mind. I thought to myself, asterisk, this is it. This is my chance star. What better way to win her over than with a candlelit dinner I've personally cooked? After all, they say the way to a person's heart is through their stomach, right? Let me backtrack a bit. I've never actually cooked a full, fancy meal before. Sure, I could put together basic stuff, but making something that could potentially knock her socks off? That was new territory. I'd seen enough food shows and YouTube tutorials to know the basics of making a good meal, so I felt confident that I could pull it off. I decided to go for a full 3-course meal, starter, main, and dessert. I wanted to make a real impression. I wanted this night to be perfect. After scouring the internet for hours, I came up with the menu. I'd start with a simple but elegant caprese salad, tomatoes, mozzarella, basil, balsamic reduction. For the main course, I'd tackle a roasted chicken with garlic mashed potatoes and green beans. And for dessert, I decided to go all out with a chocolate lava cake. Yes, I was ambitious. But I was confident. I had this. I made the mistake of not taking into account the fact that I had zero experience with actually timing everything correctly. But that was fine, right? It's just basic cooking. How hard could it be? The day of the dinner, I started by cleaning my apartment. I wanted everything to be spotless, not just for her, but also because I didn't want her to think I was a slob. I spent about 2 hours cleaning, tidying up, and setting the table. I made sure to light some candles to add a nice romantic touch. As I'm setting the mood, I get a text from Sarah saying she'll be over in about 45 minutes. That's my cue to start cooking. Or rather, that's when I should have started cooking. I began with the salad, which was honestly the easiest thing to do. It took me about 15 minutes to prep, and it was looking pretty good. But then I moved on to the chicken. I wasn't sure how long to roast it for, but I figured 40 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit seemed good enough, right?
Wrong.
I didn't know that the internal temperature of the chicken needs to reach 165 degrees Fahrenheit, but I was too focused on the timing to check. I just set the oven and went to work on the mashed potatoes. Here's where I really messed up. I decided to make the mashed potatoes from scratch. Like a true culinary warrior, I peeled, boiled, and mashed those potatoes. The mashed potatoes were going swimmingly until I realized that I had nowhere to put them while I focused on other things. I had no plan for keeping them warm. So I thought, hey, I'll just put them in a bowl and cover them with aluminum foil. That should work. Spoiler alert, it did not work. At this point, Sarah texted me again, saying she was on her way. I started to panic. I hadn't even checked on the chicken yet. I went to the oven and pulled out the chicken, and that's when I realized that the skin was a little too crispy. I grabbed a meat thermometer and checked the temperature. It was around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. No big deal, I thought. I'll just throw it back in for a few more minutes. This was my first mistake. While the chicken was back in the oven, I began to prep the green beans. In my haste, I forgot to trim the ends. I was rushing so much that I didn't even notice the water I was boiling for the beans was bubbling over the side of the pot. The entire kitchen was becoming a disaster, but I kept my cool. I can fix this, I told myself. Then I made my second huge mistake. I remembered I needed to start the lava cakes, but instead of preheating the oven like a normal person, I just shoved the ramekins in there, hoping the oven would do its thing. Of course, it didn't. The cakes were unevenly cooked, and now I had a burnt, sticky mess in my oven. But Sarah was just minutes away, and I didn't have time to fix it. So, I did the only thing I could do. I scraped the cakes out of the ramekins, hoping Sarah wouldn't notice how tragic they looked. Now, at this point, I was feeling the pressure. Sarah would be arriving any minute, and I still had no idea how the chicken was doing. I took it out of the oven and cut into it.
It was dry.
I'm talking Sahara Desert dry. I had no clue how I managed to ruin chicken like this. The mashed potatoes were cold, and the green beans were soggy from the water I'd let boil over. My dreams of culinary excellence were quickly crumbling before my eyes. With everything coming together like a disaster movie, I heard a knock at the door. It was Sarah. She looked great, and I could tell she was excited. I, on the other hand, was barely holding it together. I greeted her with a smile that probably looked like a grimace, but I led her to the table. I had everything set up, trying to hide the fact that the food was a hot mess. As we sat down, I attempted to pour wine and chat, pretending that everything was fine. But as soon as Sarah took her first bite of chicken, I saw the look of confusion in her eyes. Is this supposed to be this dry?" she asked, clearly trying to be polite. I chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, I think I might have left it in a little too long. Things only went downhill from there. The mashed potatoes were tasteless and cold, and the green beans were practically mush. The lava cakes were a tragedy. When Sarah tried the cake, it didn't have any lava in it, just a dense, brick-like texture that made us both wince. I tried to salvage it by saying it was an experimental take on the traditional lava cake, but she wasn't buying it. At this point, she was kind of laughing along with me, probably because the whole thing had become so absurd. We eventually finished the meal, and I could tell she was being nice about it, but I knew I had totally botched it. As we sat there in awkward silence, I couldn't help but think about how my grand gesture of impressing her had turned into a cooking disaster of epic proportions. After a bit more awkward small talk, she left early. I walked her to the door, trying to hold back the embarrassment. She gave me a hug, and I could tell she was trying not to laugh too hard. Well, it was an experience, she said before heading out. In the end, Sarah and I ended things after that night. It wasn't because of the cooking fiasco, at least not directly, but I could tell she wasn't that into me anymore. I guess the whole night was a perfect metaphor for my relationship with cooking, a beautiful idea that turned into a hot mess. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.